Good morning, artists, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. So we take a tour of ancient Rome today. Today we're going to talk about the fall of ancient Rome. Now, the fall of ancient Rome mirrors very much the financial predicament the United States has gotten ourselves into with our running debt clock and the impact that it may or may not have on your future. We'll run through kind of all those different details. In the background today, we'll actually have a running 3D model that shows what Rome would have looked like in its heyday and its glory. And the question at hand is, how on earth would a civilization that is the most powerful empire on earth be able to fall apart in the better part of about a 50-year window? And could it happen today with a modern superpower, i.e., maybe the United States? Now, as we ended off last time in talking, at the end of each art history period or time period from the historical period, there's a dramatic change in the way the arts and the artists understand and show their artwork. Whether that's the Egyptian civilization, whether that's the Hellenistic period of ancient Greece, or the very end of the Greek civilization when we look at the tetrarchs and we move for the falling down of the imperial program. And we can compare and contrast the high point of any art period then with the period at the very end to show the radical differences and changes that happen of power dynamics when they're at their heyday, like the Augusta Prima Porta over here versus the tetrarchs. So the question we have to ask then, based upon our American arts today, is America's superpower status in trouble? If you look at the 1917 model over here, of fountain versus banana, we both have a conceptual art piece, a ready-made found object. So perhaps the artwork has not changed that much. Let's look at the same way with the portraiture from American Gothic from 1930, really kind of celebrating the American farm center or critiquing the American farm life. It was actually pretty unclear in the 1930s which this was doing, versus the 2004 where we have an individual named Chuck Close who actually creates fractal type images, also self-portraits and of portraits, showing because he has a problem actually with his eyesight. So you can see actually the portraiture hasn't changed that unrealistically, just different technology, different techniques that we're actually able to use it for. The last joke my mom ever sent me, so my mom used to send me a joke every day before she passed a little while ago, and here's the last joke my mom ever sent me. How did the Romans split their empire? So here's us actually traveling in China. With a pair of Caesars. I never claimed the jokes were good or funny. I know, dad jokes, mom jokes, they're about the same. Now, at the end of the Roman Empire, one thing we have to be very certain is that we divide the two. If you look at the purple area versus the orange area, the purple area, the Eastern Empire, is going to become the empire that we call the Byzantine Empire, which is basically going to carry on very much of what in the ancient Roman format. They might not have all the technology, but they're going to continue on with the Christian format, particularly of Constantine, Emperor Constantine, Rome's first Christian, truly Christian emperor, who changes and basically legitimizes Christianity within the Roman world. The Western Roman Empire of Spain, of Portugal, of North Africa, of France, of England, that is almost going to completely fall. And when that does, we're going to move into a period that's called the Dark Ages, which we'll deal with in our next class. The question that shows up for us then, and this is true all the way up until the present day, is why have all world powers failed? There seems to be an underlying trend that almost all world powers have failed at some point. Look at Mesopotamia. They were a dominant world power for 3,600 years, for 4,000 BCE to 400 BCE, and they failed. Ancient Egypt, 3,200 to 400 BCE. Look at the date. It's basically they end at the same date. You guys recall from your art class for Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt why these two powers failed at about the same time? That's correct. It's the rise of the phalanx and iron technology of ancient Greece. So ancient Greece comes onto the scene with their starting period of either 1100 for the Iliad or 776 for the first Olympics, going to 146. In ancient Greece fell why? Perfect. It's the ancient Roman Empire that shows up, and the ancient Roman Empire develops that professional army. So they're using the phalanx, but with professionals rather than amateurs, but they also have a professional navy. Later on, we're going to have England being the great world superpower from about 1600 to 1900, and the United States, really people want to say 1776, but to be quite honest, we weren't a superpower until the aftermath of World War II. So which one country was the most powerful nation in the entire world out of the 196 or 197 nations of the world, depending on who's doing the counting, in 2000? Perfect. It's the United States of America. Let's go back 100 years. Which country was the most powerful in the world in 1900? Note the red splotch show basically how much control. Good. That's England during the British Empire, where they controlled 30% of the world. The most powerful company in the world was the East India Company. What about in 1800? Note there's a hint by the flag. Excellent. That's Napoleon in France. That's the Napoleonic region that shows up in 1800. Going back another 100 years. What about in 1700? Who's the world superpower? Good. That's the Spanish Empire. So owning half of North America and a fair amount of Latin and Central America. What about in 1600? This one might surprise you because you probably can't even locate this country or this area on a map today. It's the Dutch, basically in Netherlands and Holland, this tiny little area of orange all the way up here. And how powerful were they? Because they owned the shipping networks and the transatlantic slave trade. So if you look at the Dutch East India Company, when we adjust for inflation, look at the Dutch East India Company. That's Apple. See that tiny little thing down there? That little thing over there is Apple. The Dutch East India Company was about 30 of them, or at least 20 of them. You note the difference. They basically wrote the laws, and countries then enforced their laws. What about in 1500? We go back 100 more years. No, there's been no repetition so far. That's the Vatican and the papacy. 1400, again, with no repeats. At that point is going to be China. And so we can go back a couple hundred more years, but what we'll notice is that there's no repeat any 100 years. So it basically begs the question. If the United States was the world superpower in 2000, England in 1900, France in 1800, Spain in 1700, Dutch in 1600, Vatican in 1500, China in 1400, who is on the rise that in 2100, 80 short years from now, because it's roughly 2020, 80 short years from now will be the superpower? And let's say who are the potential contenders? My argument would China has a very good shot within this process. They have the largest population. They're developing. They still have 300 more million people to bring out of poverty. India is very much on the rise as well. The United States, as we'll see later on today, we might be spending ourselves into oblivion. So the question that becomes in this particular section is, how does this most powerful civilization on earth, how does Rome fall? And this leads, excuse me, to the United Nations 2 Sustainable Development Goals. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. How do we continue on? Number 16, we're going to need peace, justice, and strong institutions in order to keep a superpower status like the United States has today. So how did Rome fall, or why did Rome fall? There's a couple different issues that show up here. One is going to be wasteful spending. They overspent what they actually brought in. They're going to have greedy politicians that don't agree between two different sides of the aisle, very similar to the way we have today. They're going to start endless wars. In fact, their entire population or their entire civilization is based upon conquering someone else, bringing them into the Roman fold, and then conquering the next people out. And eventually they're going to have unpaid debt, which is going to cause their civilization to collapse. Now, it's very rare that a world superpower spends themselves into oblivion, but it does occasionally happen. The Romans did it, and then also it actually happened only 30 years ago. The Soviet Union fell under the weight of its own unpaid debt as well. And a pair of jeans at one point were about $250 for a regular pair of jeans, not designer jeans, just to show you how ridiculous inflation and hyperinflation got out. So let's look at the difference between the ancient Rome and some of the similarities between Rome and the United States. The first time, we often consider outsourcing a very new phenomenon. That's just simply not the case. Rome was one of those first major empires that actually did outsourcing. So I love the cartoon actually up here on the left. Basically, China or bust, next stop, India or bust. It really does go through and show you, right, what happens if we, with our supply chain, and the things that we really need outsource, and then we can no longer get them. This is what happens with ancient Rome. Ancient Rome even made the mistake of outsourcing their weapons production. So when their army needed new, updated weaponry, they had a difficult time getting it. They outsourced a lot of their work. Number two, ancient Rome was built upon a thing called a military-industrial complex. So is the United States of America. And what the military-industrial complex sets up is an interesting thing, because we often think the army is there to protect us. It's actually not in most cases, unless there's an attack directly on American soil. The way that it works is the government pays for the military. The military then is charged in terms of protecting Americans, protects our commercial interests. That's why if you think about the number of citizens of America that are around the planet versus the number of military bases, there's currently 196 or 197 nations on Earth, depending on who's doing the counting. And what is very interesting about this is that we have military bases in, guess how many? Even if they're small military bases. We have military bases and presence in 154 out of 196 or 97 nations on Earth. That's just untenable. And for some reason, we have decided as the United States of America, we would like to be the world's police force. And that really kind of puts major drain on the American economy. Now, it's wonderful actually for the rest of the world, which doesn't generally have to pay for their defense, but it does mean that we are defending democracy and commercial interests, oil lane shipping in the Middle East to our friends in our NATO, North American trade allies that we don't necessarily have the money for. Your tax money actually helps to go pay for this. France and Germany does not. And so on the right, it says war. Who is it good for? And you might know the Bruce Springsteen song, absolutely nothing. Say it again. But really, war is quite good for major multinational corporations that are weapons manufacturers, like Lockheed Martin, Halliburton, Boeing, and Raytheon. Ancient Rome versus the United States. Ancient Rome faced an immigration or a barbarization problem, just like we did, with reduced inequalities. If you are the superpower on Earth, and there appears to be like the Roman dream and the American dream, people are going to want to come to that country. Even people that want to come to that country for a better life, many of them are not going to have the job skills or even the language skills to be immediately successful. And so they're going to need a social support network, a background network, or they're going to have the very lowest and menial jobs, which may or may not even make minimum wage, depending on how quickly or how well we are enforcing minimum wage laws at the time. This actually happened in ancient Rome, and ancient Rome became basically the catch-all for anyone who wanted to be Roman. They would move to ancient Rome and expect to have a better life. And a lot of them fell into such things as slavery and issues. So we had immigration and barbarization that were taking place in ancient Rome, same way that we have this immigration issue that shows up today. Now, this is not anti-immigrant or pro-immigrant, just saying that every country has a carrying capacity on how many immigrants they can let in at any given point and still have a functional middle class economy. This is one of the things ancient Rome had to deal with. Ancient Rome versus the United States, they also had this issue called hyperinflation. Now, I'm going to give you a complex definition and explain it pretty easily. Hyperinflation is merely the idea when inflation gets so high and you are printing money at the same time so that the value of your money is much less, which drives prices through the roof. Now, there's no problem with hyperinflation, provided that you are making American and buying American, or making from whatever country and buying it from that same country, because it's a fair exchange of goods. If you are making a lot more money and paying for a lot more for goods, it's an equal exchange. The problem is we have lost most of our manufacturing. So now the value of our dollar going down, we are actually buying goods from other parts of the world, most notably Mexico, China, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. And so that means if you look at this particular chart, you can see the value of what we would have bought with our grocery shopping in 1998, a full carton of groceries. In 2005, really a mere 15 years ago, half a carton of groceries. And in 2013, and it's even worse today, basically you get a couple of items. And so that is what hyperinflation is. Printing money to prop up the economy leads to hyperinflation. That's what we keep doing. And that's why our debt is such an issue. The way the ancient Romans did this is that they had Roman coinage, and they just started making Roman coins with less metal. So they were actually less valuable because they had less metal in them. That's what they had to do at the end of the imperial era before they collapsed. Will we learn our lesson? And ancient Rome versus the United States, another one is technology. And I'm happy to say this is one where we are not actually falling behind like all the others that we've actually talked about. Ancient Rome stopped innovating. They had the biggest, baddest, best military on earth. They had the full iron professional army and navy. They had the best of the best of the best. And in about 250, they stopped investing in military technology. Well, across the Silk Road came two brand new inventions across the Silk Road from China. One was the horseshoe, the other one was the compass. And so when armies started incorporating this, the Romans had no response. Because basically what the horseshoe and the compass allow you to do is outrun the Romans so you do not have to fight them. If you fight them one-on-one, they still have the most powerful professional army on earth. And so we're going to have to use different tactics. So some of the barbarians, particularly in Germania and Britannia and Scotland, they would actually get horses with horseshoes so they could travel much farther, much faster, and up much more steep grades into mountains and passes, where it would take the Romans days to walk there. It might take people on horseback maybe a couple of hours. So the Romans would show up, be ready to fight without their compass, without their horseshoe. They would have walked, they're tired, they're ready to fight, and they look up and they realize, oh wow, our enemy is on the next hill over. So they would then have to march to that next hill. They made it to the next hill. The army has already gone. They're now 2 hills over. And so the Romans were never able to catch up because they stopped innovating on their military technology. Outside of the computer industry, we've actually done a pretty good job keeping up with our industrial nations that want to do us harm, except potentially in the cybersecurity world. So how did Rome fall and why did Rome fall? Wasteful spending, greedy politicians, started endless wars, unpaid debt, which basically leads to hyperinflation, the idea of stopped innovating on the technological level, outsourcing, all these things become part of the issue. And this is why the lovely American flag here says sold, because we have basically sold our American tax policy to many of the corporations. There's a lot of corporations in America that don't pay any taxes at all because of loopholes that are there. That was never really the intention. Now for us, we've got to actually consider where we're at versus ancient Rome. I will tell you, if you look how much the US debt grew under each president, Donald Trump, this is 2018 to 2021 predicted. Now this number will definitely go up much higher because of the coronavirus. We're looking at a $2 trillion roughly bailout for small businesses, for individuals that are actually losing their job, which will probably be in the millions by the time we get through the month or 2 month sequestration during. So that number is absolutely going to go up. But if you look in the most recent presidents, from Donald Trump in the red to Barack Obama in that lighter red to George Bush in the purple to Bill Clinton in the light purple to Ronald Reagan all the way at the maroon, you'll note there's a separation. Under the administration of Ronald Reagan, we started really spending money that we did not have. So we started spending money that was greater than the amount of money that the government was coming in, hence running up our deficits. Note, this is a very recent phenomenon. This only started in the 1980s. So we literally are only 40 years into this. 20 years in the 1980s, 1990s, and then the 2000s up to about 2020s. And the question will be, will we be able to get this under control? Because it's slowly getting out of control. Look at all the presidents before us. See that light little line beneath us? That's pink and blue and green. That's all of the presidents before us and the debt they racked up. No, every president has done multiple versions of that since then. So we basically are bankrupting ourselves. We're living beyond our means. So on the right hand, if you look at the Exhibit 1, the history of US debt, look going back to 1920, we had a very little debt. Then we had the Great Depression right here in the 1930s. But no, we still have very little debt. Then 1945, we win the war. Look, that red line goes up, but note how quickly we pay that back and then stay stable all the way until 1980. So our economy is booming, and that's the gray area. Our US debt ratio is going down. Then all of a sudden in 1980 with President Reagan, we start investing or start taking money and spending more money than the government brings in. So much so that today we actually do that. We broke this is the amount of money that the United States brings, basically our GDP, our gross domestic product. Note, our national debt now exceeds our gross domestic product. The only time in American history that ever happened was when we won World War II, an entire world war as part of the Allied powers. And we basically have done nothing with it except waste and squander that. So we've actually gotten ourselves into quite a pickle in the last 40 years. I will tell you, when Rome's financials, when they fell, they were about $15 trillion in debt. We are currently, if you look at the debt chart right now, we're about $21 trillion in debt, and that's before the $2 trillion for Corona. Here's the thing that actually should scare all of us. When we look at ancient Rome versus the United States, remember I mentioned ancient Rome, 15 trillion in debt when they finally collapsed. The US national debt, we just talked about that, is about 21 trillion. But we also have a number of what we call unfunded mandates. And those unfunded mandates are money that we have promised to give or to reinvest for people in the future. So for all of you, you probably get a paycheck. And on that paycheck, you'll have Social Security wages that are taken out. If you don't know, Social Security is taken out and is supposed to be saved by the government, so you have a small income when you retire. The government has not invested any of that income. In fact, they've actually spent it every year. So when you get Social Security, or when your parents or grandparents get Social Security today, it's you in the present day that's actually paying for it because we wasted the system when we first set it up. Beyond all that, we also have US states debt. And whenever you see red, you should know that red in a balance sheet connotes that we have some problems. So look at the true status of where we are financially here in the United States. Our US national debt is 21 trillion and grows by about $1 trillion a year we overspend. The federal government only makes $4 to $5 trillion a year, and we spend 5 to 6. So that's just untenable long term. The unfunded mandate, that's also all the Social Security we've paid off for the baby boomers, and that you're still currently paying into, but not going to see any of the benefits because it's going to be your grandkids that pay your benefits because we haven't balanced our budget sheets. The US state debts, if you add that all together, the current US national debt is $56 trillion. The 2020 American budget, we expect revenues to be somewhere around 4.5 trillion. In the aftermath of Corona, that's probably going to go down closer to 4 trillion. Our federal expenditures are going to go from 5.5 trillion. That means just in this last year, if the numbers hold up and we do well, we're going to go $1 trillion in debt. And that number will probably be closer to 3 trillion after we pay off for everything that's going on with Corona, the unemployment. So that means at the end of this year, we might be $60 trillion in the hole. Remember, the federal government only can bring in 4.5 to 5 trillion dollars in the future. So let's think about what that means. Your federal government only brings in the revenue of 4.5 trillion, and we've got a $60 trillion deficit. That basically means that all government services would have to shut down for 15 years without any interest, but for 15 years without any post office, any public education, any public hospital, any public insurances, any government, no president, no military, no police, no fire, just to pay back the debt. So you would already be well into your adulthood years. That is an untenable situation. You can see it really is a product of Ronald Reagan, so it's not a Democrat or Republican problem. Democrats and Republicans we've got addicted to overspending our money. The left's answer is let's raise taxes on the very wealthy. And so that will bring in a small modicum of money. And they're right, that would. That might bring in a couple $1 trillion. But once you get 60 trillion or 50 trillion or $20 trillion, a couple $1 trillion amongst friends is actually not the right answer because it might also slow the economy long term. The right or the more conservative Republican response is let's cut taxes and that will stimulate growth. And they're right. That probably would do that to a couple trillions of dollars. The problem is because we haven't done anything and we've known about this for 20 years, we did nothing over the 20 years because it's very unpopular. Raise taxes or cut public spending in some public services, people want to get reelected. And as such, we've done neither, and we're getting closer and closer to bankrupting our system. You are the first generation where we do predict that your life will probably be not as good off as the life of your parents here in the United States of America. You're that first group that we actually can definitively say that probably is going to be the truth. And the problem with it, of course, is that as long as you don't vote, your voice is not going to care. And here's the reasons why young people don't vote, but we need you all to become voters. If you were to vote, and this is what happens when you don't vote, your tax rate may change, your personal rights may change, your health care might change, your retirement age will change. Right now, my retirement age is established. My dad's retirement age, I should mention, was established at 65. Mine is at 68. Yours right now is at 72, and they are actually considering raising that as high as 78. Maybe even 80 has been thrown out there. And part of the idea is this: if you don't vote, they don't need to listen to you. They don't need to make policies. You're not part of their base. So even though you're Americans, you're not part of the base that's going to help them get elected. And generally, you millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, you don't vote until you're about age 35. The longer you wait to vote, the longer it is that we are going to push this unethical process and you paying back this debt that you had no experience or no say in building. We're going to push it off on you. Remember, because if we can work you till you die, we never have to pay back that Social Security that we haven't been saving for you from the very get-go. So we have a vested interest, the older generation, to actually not to just keep raising the retirement age that shows up. Your college affordability may change. It used to be that Miami-Dade College, and this is just an example of one college, but this is true of any public institution. Miami-Dade used to get paid 30% of your of what you got, or 30% of your college credits that you put in. So if you put in $1,000 to pay for a particular class, Miami-Dade, once you complete that class, will get $300 back to help covering our offering expenses. And that was the way we were able to keep college costs low. Well, the problem is we actually now only get 7.7% back. So that's a drastic cut. In the last decade, basically 75% of the funding has been cut in community colleges. And that is true actually for private institutions. That's why the cost of really good public education has skyrocketed. One of the states that's actually done a really good job trying to manage that is Florida. So you are very lucky to live in Florida, even though it is expensive. It's not nearly as expensive as in other states around the way. If you have a pre-existing health problem issue, currently it's covered under Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, ACA. That is actually something that is actually in jeopardy. If you don't vote, that might become in jeopardy. Family leave may change. The Supreme Court will definitely change, and funding for the arts will absolutely change. So for you, think about voting, if nothing else, for your own future. The sooner you start voting, and the sooner you can get other people in your generation to start voting, the sooner they will pay attention to you. If you do not vote, you do not have a say. And if you don't vote at about the 35 or 33% rate, so one of every three of you that's eligible to vote, they're not going to care about your particular issues, and you will work basically till you die. So that is one of the things that is out there. So we talk about retirement age, your taxes will probably go up, college will become less affordable. Those are the issues that you cared about. How ridiculous is it? If you look up here about voted the best Mexican restaurant in 2018, ABC 13 in Houston had so it depends on who votes. ABC 13 Houston had a wonderful competition where they wanted to know the best Mexican restaurant in all of Houston, Texas. And what came in number one? Taco Bell. Taco Bell should not come in as the best Mexican restaurant anywhere, even if you like it, let alone in Houston, Texas, with a very large Mexican population. So you need to vote for your own future. Now, here's a question that I pose out to you. Should students who are eligible to vote and don't still receive federal financial aid? And the reason I ask is because the fact is, college financial aid literally began to create an engaged citizenry. They wanted people that would actually go out and vote, potentially run for office and help run the country. That's why we provided federal financial aid. So it wasn't only wealthy people and the uber wealthy who are doctors and lawyers, particularly lawyers running the country, who already had money and enough wherewithal, enough political clout to move up. It was to try to encourage people in lower middle class and in the lower class. And so should students who are eligible to vote and don't still receive financial aid, or should it get it cut off? I will tell you my own personal opinion, but I would love to know your opinion. I don't think they should. If you can't get yourself to get informed enough to vote, why would we want to spend? Because the whole point of college financial aid is to get you to be an engaged citizen. If you can't engage, even if you don't like the candidate enough to vote, to get out and vote against or for an issue, why should we invest in your future? Because that's my taxpayer money as well as your taxpayer money. Shouldn't those go to people who are going to be actively involved to make the system better for everyone? That's the goal. One last thing that shows up is that let's look at a different career opportunity, At the end of every class, we very much like to give you a different career opportunity in the arts. And here's one that you may have never thought of before. This is an art copyist. So this is someone who literally goes in and makes very close, or if they can get close enough, imperceptible differences between what the real artwork is and a fake artwork. This generally involves a Master's of Fine Arts degree, an MFA degree. Starting salaries for individuals who actually want this job are somewhere around 45,000, and they can go up for the masters, they can go up all the way to 120,000. Wealthy people, many of them will actually want to have reproductions and copies of particular artworks that happen to be around in different areas. So like the Gustav Klimt up in the right-hand corner, or the Van Gogh, the real one that shows up there, the Monet. If you'll notice, can you even tell which one the real one versus the fake one is? Depends on how well you know the artwork as well. Klimt is famous for gold work, and so you'll note the gray background kind of gives that one away. If you'll note below the Impressionists, by what was called Impressionism Sunrise, those are very similar in style, remarkable copyists. One actually even got fooled, the one that is actually on the right, fooled scholars to believe that that was an actual Monet, and it made it into the Monet Museum. So that artwork, that copyist, actually was that good that it fooled actually Monet artists themselves. So that is a real job that's actually out there. So for us, as we wrap up and we think about the fall of Rome, why Rome fell, and how close the United States is to following that. Remember, because the Soviet Union did it the same way. They spend themselves into oblivion. The challenge here is to think about it, our Roman impacts. So list out 25 ways that ancient Rome impacts our world today. We have 10 minutes. And then at the end of this, we're going to have to decide, is Rome, ancient Greece, or Mesopotamia the most important culture for understanding the world in front of us? Mesopotamia has the fewest of the impacts, and probably the most significant, but Greece and Rome are both in the 25. So which one of those three civilizations, if it showed up on the midterm question or a final exam question, has had the most significant impact in the world that we live? The other way we can actually do this is to challenge and do A to Z. Think of an artwork, a personality, an invention, or an aesthetic from each letter of the alphabet about ancient Rome. Remember, we do have a Z here because they did invent zoos. So it's, can you get the X, Y, the W's actually to try to get a full letterboard that shows up. All right, and we'll come back and look at those later. The last thing I have for you, if you are struggling with the class or you feel like you're hitting rock bottom for any other situation, here's some quotes from Michael Jordan to help pick you up, hopefully. Michael Jordan said, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games 26 times. I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life." That means you take risks. Remember, we talked about taking the grit score, and that is why I succeed. So at some point in your career, please make sure you bet on yourself. If something's not going right, come talk to one of your professors, or come talk to someone that can actually help and guide you to get you on that right path so that you can succeed. We don't want the failures to be the same failures over and over. We want you to actually make and challenge yourself. So occasionally, yes, of course, there's going to be failure. Everyone has that. I have that in my background. I have a whole book, a binder of failures where I've got rejected from different things. But I still believed in myself. I took it on. I worked hard to actually overcome those. Very similar to the way Michael Jordan did. Not clearly the work ethic of Michael Jordan. I mean, the man is amazing. But to actually overcome those so that we actually can move on and be successful in different aspects. And once you get successful, success breeds success. Other people that are successful will find you out. So it's a matter of moving to that aspect. So this we want to make sure that we're dealing with is success breeding success. And that largely means a growth mindset. One of your videos for this week will deal with the difference between a stagnant mindset and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset and a growth mindset. The fixed mindset is very fixed for, you don't believe intelligent changes, you don't believe how much effort and the growth mindset says that if you actually try and do these different things, they absolutely will change. And I very much attest and would encourage you to believe in that growth mindset. Give yourself a couple opportunities to use that growth mindset, and invariably, I would venture that you will be successful within that growth mindset, much more so than in the fixed mindset, as per our video. All right. Well, as the sun is slowly setting here, and we are actually looking over past, I would like to say goodbye to ancient Rome, and I look forward to actually seeing you guys in class in the near future. Have a wonderful day. Bye.